Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes. Today, we're diving into a book that's notoriously dense and complex,
Yeah,
but also incredibly rewarding. Martin Heidegger's Being and Time.
it's a book that really makes you think about fundamental questions we often take for granted. Like, what does it even mean to exist?
Right.
Not just as a person or a thing, but to be itself.
Yeah, you're right. It's not exactly light beach reading.
Yeah.
But that's why we're here, right? To break down those big ideas and see what gems we can uncover.
Absolutely. And believe me, there are gems galore in Being and Time, even if they're sometimes buried pretty deep.
So before we get lost in the existential woods, can you give us a quick overview of the book's main themes and structure? What's Heidegger trying to do here?
Well, in a nutshell, Being and Time is Heidegger's attempt to answer the question of being. He wants to understand what it means for something to exist, and he does this by focusing on the unique way that we as human beings exist in the world. He calls this way of being Dasein.
Okay, Dossie. So it's not just about being a physical thing in the world like a rock or a tree. It's about our particular way of being in the world, right?
Exactly. And Heidegger argues that our being is fundamentally intertwined with time. We're not just static beings, we're constantly changing, becoming, shaped by our past, and oriented towards our future.
That makes sense. We're always caught up in this flow of time, aren't we? Always looking back, looking forward, trying to make sense of where we are in the grand scheme of things.
Yes. And Heidegger thinks that traditional philosophy has missed this crucial connection between being and time. He sees Dasein, our way of being, as the key to unlocking the mystery of being itself.
Wow, okay, so we've got this big question of being. And Heidegger is saying that the answer lies in understanding Dasein and its relationship to time. But Being and Time is a pretty hefty book. How does he actually go about exploring all of this?
Well, you could think of the book as having two main movements. The first delves into the nature of Dasein itself. It explores how we exist in the world, how we relate to things, how we experience time, and how we get caught up in societal expectations.
And then the second part.
That's where Heidegger steps back and looks at the history of philosophy. He shows how other thinkers, even the really famous ones, might have missed the true meaning of being because they weren't looking at it through the lens of Dasein.
Fascinating. So it's not just a deep dive into our existence, it's also a reinterpretation of the whole history of philosophy.
Exactly. But let's start with that first part, the exploration of Dasein. It's where Heidegger introduces some of his most important and thought-provoking concepts.
All right, lead the way. Where do we begin?
Heidegger begins by emphasizing that Dasein is always being in the world. It's not like we're just dropped into the world as separate, isolated entities. We're fundamentally intertwined with it, always already engaged with the things around us and the people we encounter.
So it's not like we're looking out at the world through a window, observing it from a distance. We're in it, participating in it, shaping it, and being shaped by it.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the ways Heidegger illustrates this is through our everyday interactions with tools. He calls this readiness to hand.
The hammer example, right?
Exactly. Think about when you're using a hammer. You're not really focused on the hammer itself as an object, are you? You're focused on the task at hand, the nail you're trying to drive, the project you're building. The hammer becomes almost an extension of yourself, a seamless part of your world.
It's only when the hammer breaks, or you can't find it, that it suddenly becomes this separate thing, this object you have to think about and deal with. I guess that's what he means by present at hand.
You got it. And Heidegger thinks this distinction between ready to hand and present at hand is really important for understanding how we relate to the world. We're not just surrounded by objects, we're engaged in a dynamic, meaningful relationship with them.
It's making me look at even the most ordinary things in a whole new light. Like even this microphone I'm holding. It's not just a piece of metal and plastic. It's part of this whole process of communication, of sharing ideas and connecting with you and everyone listening.
That's exactly the kind of shift in perspective Heidegger is trying to encourage. And it gets even deeper when he introduces the concept of care as the fundamental structure of Dasein.
Care. What does he mean by that?
Well, Heidegger sees care as the driving force behind all our actions, our choices, the way we engage with the world. It's not just about being nice to people. It's about the fundamental way that we're oriented towards the world, how we project ourselves into the future, how we're concerned with things, how we care about our own being and the being of others.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Mm.
So it's not just about our feelings or emotions. It's about the very structure of our existence.
Mm.
We're always already caught up in this web of care, whether we're aware of it or not.
Precisely. And this brings us to another important concept. The they, or as some translations put it, the one, is Heidegger's way of describing the pervasive influence of societal norms and expectations on our lives.
Oh, yeah, it's like they say you should go to college or they say you should get a good job and settle down. It's that constant pressure to conform to what society expects of us.
Exactly, and Heidegger thinks that when we get too caught up in the they, we risk losing touch with our own authentic selves. We become inauthentic, living according to someone else's script instead of our own.
That definitely resonates with me. It's like we're always trying to live up to these external expectations instead of asking ourselves what truly matters to us.
And Heidegger suggests that one of the ways we can break free from this inauthenticity is by confronting our own mortality. He calls this being towards death.
That sounds a bit intense. Are we talking like full-on existential crisis here?
Not necessarily. It's not about being morbid or dwelling on death. It's about recognizing that our existence is finite, that we have a limited time to live, and using that awareness to empower us to live more authentically.
So it's like by acknowledging the fact that we're going to die someday, we can actually free ourselves from the tyranny of the they and start living a life that's true to ourselves.
That's the idea. Heidegger thinks that when we confront our own mortality, we're forced to ask ourselves some really important questions. What do we really value? What do we want to accomplish in the time we have? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind?
Wow, that's really powerful. It's like death, even though it's something we often try to avoid thinking about, can actually be a source of clarity and motivation.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of the most challenging, but also most rewarding aspects of Heidegger's thought, his analysis of time. He doesn't see time as just this linear progression of past, present, and future. Instead, he sees it as deeply intertwined with Dasein, with our very way of being in the world.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does he connect time and Dasein?
Well, Heidegger argues that time isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we actively constitute through our existence. He calls this temporality.
So we're not just passive observers of time, we're actively shaping it through our actions and experiences.
Precisely. And this is where he introduces this idea of time having three ecstasies, almost like dimensions of temporality: future, having been, and the present.
Ecstasies. That's an interesting word choice.
Heidegger loves his poetic language, but it makes sense when you think about it. An ecstasy is like a state of being outside of yourself, and that's kind of what these temporal dimensions are like. They pull us out of ourselves, orient us towards different horizons of our being.
So it's not just about past, present, and future as points on a timeline. It's about how these dimensions of time shape our experience of the world and ourselves.
Exactly. And for Heidegger, understanding these ecstasies is essential for grasping the meaning of being itself.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into these ecstasies and see how they all fit together.
Let's do it. But before we jump into that, there's another important piece of the puzzle we need to address: Heidegger's critique of traditional philosophy. Remember how I said he thinks other philosophers missed the boat when it comes to understanding being?
Yes, I remember. You said it was because they weren't looking at it through the lens of Dasein.
That's right. Heidegger argues that Western philosophy, going all the way back to the ancient Greeks, has been fixated on a particular kind of being, what he calls present at hand. It's that way of seeing things as objects, detached from our involvement with them.
So instead of focusing on our lived experience, on how we actually engage with the world, they've been trying to analyze being from a distance, like it's something separate from us.
Exactly. And this, according to Heidegger, has led to all sorts of philosophical problems and misunderstandings. It's created a false dichotomy between subject and object, between mind and world, when in reality we're always already intertwined with the world through our being.
That's a pretty radical critique. So how does Heidegger propose we overcome this philosophical blind spot?
He thinks we need to shift our focus from present at hand to ready to hand, to start seeing things not just as objects, but as things that matter to us, things that we care about and engage with in our everyday lives.
This is all starting to make sense, but I can already tell this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to being and time. We've got Dasein, time, care, the they, mortality, and now this whole critique of traditional philosophy. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but that's the beauty of Heidegger. He challenges us to think differently, to question our assumptions about the world and our place in it.
All right, so we've laid out the groundwork.
Yeah.
I'm ready to dive deeper into those ecstasies of time you mentioned and see how they all tie into Heidegger's grand vision of being.
Let's do it.
All right, let's unpack these ecstasies of time,
Okay.
which might sound a bit mystical, but trust me, they make sense once you grasp what Heidegger's getting at.
Okay. I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
So first we have the future.
Hmm.
Now, when Heidegger talks about the future, he's not just talking about what's going to happen tomorrow or next year. He's talking about possibility, about our potential to be. It's that sense of I am going to be this or I could become that. So it's not just a linear progression of events. It's about our capacity to project ourselves forward
Mm.
and imagine different possibilities for our lives.
Exactly. It's that sense of being ahead of ourselves, always reaching towards something beyond the present moment. And this aheadness, this orientation towards the future, is a fundamental part of what it means to be Dasein.
That makes sense. We're always making plans, setting goals, dreaming of what might be.
Hmm.
It's like we can't escape this pull towards the future.
Right. And then there's having been, which is Heidegger's way of talking about the
I
past.
have to say, having been sounds a lot more profound than just the past.
Well, that's because for Heidegger, the past isn't just a bunch of dead and gone events. It's a living force that shapes who we are in the present. It's the ground upon which our being stands.
So it's like we're carrying our past with us, not just in our memories, but in the very way we understand the world and ourselves.
Exactly. Our having been shapes our understanding, our values, our fears, our desires. It's the foundation upon which we build our present and our future.
It makes you realize how interconnected everything is, how the past is always present in some way.
And then, of course, there's the present, which isn't just this fleeting moment between past and future. For Heidegger, the present is all about our engagement with the world, the way we encounter things, the way we make present what matters to us.
So it's not just about what's happening right now in a chronological sense. It's about our active involvement with the world, our attentiveness to what's in front of us.
You nailed it. It's about bringing things into the light of our awareness, letting them be seen and understood.
Okay, so we've got future, having been, and the present, three ecstasies of time that are all intertwined, shaping our experience of being. But how do they all fit together? It's still a bit fuzzy for me.
Well, the key is to understand that these aren't separate compartments of time. They're all constantly interacting, influencing each other, creating this dynamic flow that Heidegger calls temporality. Think about how your past experiences shape your hopes and fears for the future, how your anticipation of what's to come colors your experience at the present moment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like if I'm dreading a meeting tomorrow, it's going to affect how I feel right now, even if the meeting hasn't happened yet. And the reason I might be dreading it is because of past experiences with similar meetings.
Exactly. You're living out Heidegger's temporality right there. And for him, this temporality is the key to understanding being itself. It's not just something that happens to us. It's the very ground of our existence, the way that being unfolds and reveals itself through Dasein.
That's a pretty mind-blowing idea. So time isn't just this external force that dictates our lives. It's woven into the very fabric of who we are. And it's the key to understanding what it means to be.
You got it. And this understanding of temporality can have a profound impact on how we live our lives. It can help us break free from the tyranny of the they, embrace our finitude, and make choices that are aligned with our authentic selves.
That's what I love about Heidegger. He's not just giving us abstract philosophical concepts. He's offering a way of seeing the world that can actually transform our lives.
Absolutely. And speaking of transformation, one of the most powerful ways that Heidegger thinks we can break free from inauthenticity is through what he calls resoluteness.
Resoluteness. What's that all about?
It's closely tied to being towards death. It's about facing our mortality with courage and determination, recognizing that we have a limited time to live and choosing to make the most of it.
So it's not about being reckless or nihilistic. It's about using the awareness of our finitude to empower us to live more authentically.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of our lives, making choices that are in line with our values, and embracing the freedom that comes with accepting our limitations.
That's a powerful idea. It makes me think about that famous line from Being and Time. Dasein's potentiality for being is veiled by its existing in the they. It's like Heidegger's saying that we're all capable of so much more than we often realize, but we're often held back by societal expectations and the fear of facing our true selves.
That's a brilliant insight. And resoluteness is all about tearing away that veil, stepping out of the shadows of the day, and embracing our full potential for being.
So it's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully ourselves, more authentically who we are meant to be.
That's it. And this process of becoming of authentic self-discovery is deeply intertwined with another key concept: anxiety.
Anxiety.
That doesn't sound very liberating.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but Heidegger sees anxiety as a fundamental mood, one that reveals the nothingness at the heart of our being.
Nothingness. Now you're really losing me.
Hang in there with me. When Heidegger talks about nothingness, He's not talking about a literal void or a lack of meaning. He's talking about the groundlessness of our existence, the fact that there's no ultimate foundation or guarantee for our being.
So it's like when we experience anxiety, we're getting a glimpse of the abyss, the groundlessness upon which our existence rests.
That's a great way to put it. And while that might sound scary, Heidegger actually thinks it can be incredibly liberating. Because when we recognize that there's no predetermined path, no ultimate authority dictating our lives, we're free to choose our own way of being. It's like anxiety, by shaking us out of our complacency and forcing us to confront the groundlessness of our existence, actually opens up a space for authentic freedom and choice.
That's exactly right. And this brings us to another crucial piece of Heidegger's thought, the concept of historicality.
Historicality, how does that fit into all of this?
Well, for Heidegger, we're not just isolated individuals trying to figure out our own lives. We're always already embedded in a historical context, shaped by the traditions, values, and events that have come before us.
So it's like our individual stories are woven into the larger tapestry of history.
Precisely. And Heidegger thinks that understanding our historicality is essential for grasping the meaning of being itself. Because being for him is not this abstract, timeless concept. It's something that unfolds over time, shaped by the choices and actions of Dasein throughout history.
This is all so interconnected. Our individual lives, our choices, our understanding of time, the history of the world, the question of being. It's like Heidegger's showing us how it's all woven together.
That's exactly what he's doing. And this realization can be incredibly empowering because it means that we're not just passive recipients of history, we're active participants in its unfolding. We have the power to shape the future, to contribute to the ongoing story of being.
I'm starting to see why Being in Time is considered such a groundbreaking work. It's not just a philosophy book, it's a call to action, an invitation to awaken to the truth of our own being and our role in the world.
And there's one final piece of this puzzle that we need to explore to really understand Heidegger's vision, his critique of technology.
Okay, technology. This is getting even more relevant to our lives today. Bring it on.
So we've been talking about how our individual lives are intertwined with time and history, but Heidegger takes it a step further by examining how technology fits into all of this.
Yeah, technology is such a huge part of our lives these days. I'm really curious to hear what Heidegger has to say about it, especially since he was writing back in the 1920s.
It's surprising how relevant his insights are even almost a century later. See, Heidegger doesn't see technology as just a bunch of gadgets and machines. He sees it as a way of revealing the world, a way of bringing things into being.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's not just about the tools themselves, it's about how we use them to understand, interact with the world around us.
Exactly. But Heidegger's worried that modern technology has become a kind of force in itself, a force that can obscure our understanding of being instead of illuminating it.
So it's almost like technology has taken on a life of its own, shaping our perceptions and our relationship with the world in ways we might not even be fully aware of.
You're getting it. Heidegger uses the term inframing to describe this tendency of modern technology to reduce everything to a kind of resource, a standing reserve to be exploited and controlled.
So it's like instead of seeing the world as this rich tapestry of interconnected beings, we start seeing it as just a collection of objects to be used and manipulated for our own purposes.
That's a great way to put it. And Heidegger's concern that this inframing way of thinking can lead to a kind of forgetfulness, of being a kind of blindness to the mystery and wonder of existence,
Yeah.
you know?
It's making me think about how obsessed we are with efficiency and optimization these days. Like everything has to be measured, analyzed, and streamlined. We're always trying to squeeze every last drop of productivity out of everything, including ourselves.
And in that process, we might be losing sight of what truly matters, of the things that give our lives meaning and purpose.
So how do we break free from this technological inframing? Does Heidegger offer any solutions?
Well, he's not advocating for a return to some pre-technological utopia. Instead, he thinks we need to cultivate a more mindful and thoughtful relationship with technology. We need to become aware of how it shapes our thinking and our perceptions, and we need to use it in ways that serve our humanity, not diminish it.
That sounds like a tall order,
Mhm.
especially in today's world where technology is so pervasive. But it's definitely a challenge worth taking on.
I agree. And remember, Heidegger's whole project in Being and Time is about waking up from the forgetfulness of everyday life, about seeing the world with fresh eyes. And that includes seeing technology with fresh eyes, recognizing both its potential and its limitations.
It's like he's urging us to step back and ask ourselves, what does it mean to be human in a technological age? How can we use these powerful tools to enhance our lives without losing sight of what makes us human in the first place.
Exactly. And that's a question that each of us has to grapple with individually and collectively. There's no easy answer. But the first step is to become aware of the question itself, to start paying attention to how technology is shaping our lives and our relationship with the world.
This has been such an incredible journey through being and time. It's a challenging book, but it's also incredibly insightful and relevant to our lives today.
I agree. And even though we've covered a lot of ground, we've really just scratched the surface of Heidegger's thought. There's
Yeah.
so much more to explore in Being in Time, and I encourage everyone listening to dive in and discover its richness for themselves.
I second that. It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it, prompting you to ask deeper questions about yourself, the world, and the meaning of existence. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Heidegger's Being and Time. Until next time.